It all started with a price. Aeryn never expected that her life would end like this. But when the cold chain of fate snapped around her neck, she had no choice but to obey. The weight of it was heavy, suffocating, and she could feel it digging into her chest with every passing second. She had been sold. And for a price so high that it didn't just sting, it scarred her. Sold to a king, to a man who had more power than she could ever understand. Theron Veyr, the Lycan King, with eyes as cold as the stone walls that surrounded her, had purchased her as a pawn. His price had been steep, an amount so high it could buy kingdoms, but the price for Aeryn was much worse. She had no choice but to give herself to him, to be his prisoner, his property. And she hated him for it. Yet, the truth was far darker than she could imagine. Aeryn had thought that her family's fall from grace, the bloodline that betrayed the throne, would be her darkest secret. But now, trapped in this castle with her collar of shame, she realized that being owned by Theron wasn't the worst part. It was the sudden, undeniable pull of something more, something dangerous. It was the truth about her fate, her destiny, and how she was never meant to belong to him. She was not just a prisoner. Aeryn had become something more. The night before she arrived, she had been told nothing. No one had warned her of the secret that would tear through her soul the moment she crossed the gates. It was not the king who would break her, not Theron, but the brother she would come to love, Caelan. The night was a silent observer as Aeryn stared out the window, the full moon casting its cold light onto the frozen earth below. The chill of the night seeped into her bones, the fear and uncertainty gripping her heart. How had she ended up here? She had been an Omega, an outcast from her own pack, abandoned by those who should have protected her. Her bloodline had been cast aside. No one would help her now. Yet, despite everything, the pain, the humiliation, the cruelty of being here, her wolf stirred. It felt the pull, the undeniable force, and she knew deep down something was changing. But what would it cost her? And that's when he appeared. The door creaked open, the softest sound cutting through the heavy silence of her chamber. Aeryn's heart skipped in her chest as she turned, her breath catching. He stepped inside, his presence commanding, his every movement deliberate, as if he knew the power of every inch of space he occupied. It was Caelan, the younger brother of King Theron. Tall, lean, with fiery eyes that burned through her like fire on a cold winter's night. He was a paradox, a prince who exuded rebellion, defiance, and strength. The kind of strength that should have been reserved for kings. He was everything she should have feared. And yet, there was something in his gaze that made her pulse race. He did not bow like the others. Instead, he met her eyes with an intensity that sent a shock of awareness through her. Aeryn could feel it before she could explain it. The bond, the fated connection. Her wolf felt it, too, stirring with a longing she didn't understand. She backed away, trying to distance herself from the overwhelming pull between them. She needed control. But his words stopped her. "You belong to the king," Caelan said softly, his voice steady yet filled with an edge she couldn't quite place. "No," she replied sharply, her words quick and desperate. "I belong to no one." The tension in the room thickened as their eyes locked. The silence that followed hung between them, an unspoken truth slowly revealing itself. Despite her words, she felt the connection. She could feel it deep within her bones, the bond, the undeniable pull to Caelan. Her wolf recognized him. She tried to look away, but his gaze held her captive, pinning her in place. His eyes, a storm of emotions, softened as they studied her. They didn't belong to a prince, nor did they belong to the son of a king. They belonged to something wild, something untamed, a force beyond her comprehension. And it was that moment, that fleeting moment, that everything changed. Later that night, when the moon hung low in the sky, Aeryn lay awake in her bed, staring at the ceiling. Her heart was a tumult of confusion, pain, and something else, something she could not name. She hadn't been brought here to be loved. She hadn't been bought to be cherished. She had been bought to be punished. To be broken. But was this punishment? Or had she been chosen for something else entirely? No one had prepared her for the truth of her situation. No one had told her that Theron's cruelty would be matched only by the fire she'd feel when Caelan's presence lingered in the air. For the first time in years, she had no answers. She was lost. She was just a girl, a woman, a wolf with no family to call her own. Now, she had no future either. Or so she thought. The next day, everything changed. Aeryn was summoned to the throne room. The massive doors opened, and the cold, oppressive atmosphere washed over her as she walked forward. The floor beneath her feet was made of marble, smooth and white as the frost-covered landscape outside. She wasn't sure why she was here, but she knew it couldn't be good. Theron Veyr, king of the Lycans, stood in the center, his gaze fixed on her. His expression was hard, unreadable, as if nothing in this world could affect him. But Aeryn knew better than to underestimate him. His power wasn't just physical, it was in the way he carried himself, in the icy stillness that surrounded him. "You know why you're here," he said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. Aeryn remained silent, her gaze steady. "No one speaks unless spoken to," Theron continued, his tone colder than before. "You're a tool, a means to an end, nothing more." She wanted to speak, to shout, to tell him she wasn't his property. But something stopped her. The way he looked at her with that same cold, calculated gaze made her question everything. Suddenly, she heard a soft growl, a barely audible sound from the corner of the room. She glanced to her right and saw Caelan standing there, his posture stiff, his eyes dark and filled with something she couldn't name. He looked at her, his gaze softer than his brother's, but it wasn't without its own intensity. The air between them crackled, as if they both knew they were on the verge of something they couldn't escape. But what could it be? That night, she lay in her bed once more, her thoughts swirling. The pull between her and Caelan hadn't gone away. If anything, it had grown stronger. Her wolf stirred with a force she couldn't control. But the more she tried to deny it, the more she realized it wasn't something she could run from. What was it? A knock on the door. She didn't need to look. She knew who it was. She had felt it before he even spoke. "Aeryn," Caelan's voice drifted through the air, low and quiet. "Go away," she replied, not wanting to deal with it, not wanting to face the fact that this was real. But then he entered, stepping into the room like a shadow. The air between them crackled, their bodies instinctively drawn to one another. The scent of him, earth and wood and something darker, flooded her senses. "You don't belong here," he said softly, his voice thick with something she couldn't decipher. "You belong with me." Aeryn's breath caught in her throat. The moment his words landed, the world seemed to stop. There was no more noise, no more distractions. Just him, and her, and the undeniable pull between them. "You don't even know what you're saying," she replied, but the words felt hollow. "Don't I?" Caelan took a step closer, his body so near she could feel the heat radiating off him. Her heart hammered in her chest. "No," she whispered, but it wasn't a denial. It was a plea. Then, without another word, Caelan's lips met hers. The kiss was fierce, filled with everything they had both been holding back. Every inch of her skin hummed with the electricity between them. It was a kiss of hunger, a kiss of desperation. And as her lips parted beneath his, everything shifted. The kiss broke. The bond pulsed between them, stronger than anything she had ever felt, but before she could speak, Theron's voice echoed down the corridor. "You will never be his," he said, his words a threat that would haunt them both forever. And that was when Aeryn knew. This was no longer just about survival. This was about war. Aeryn had thought she understood what it was to feel fear, to be powerless. She had thought she knew what it was to be broken by life, to have nothing left to lose. But nothing had prepared her for this. Not the biting cold of the palace, not the cruel eyes of Theron, nor the way her heart raced every time Caelan was near. The moment their lips had met, it was like her entire world had shattered, 1,000 pieces falling at her feet. She had tried to fight it. She had tried to push him away, to ignore the raw, undeniable pull between them. But now, in the silence of the night, as her breath echoed in the stillness, she understood. She had been running from something much bigger than herself. She had been running from fate, and fate had just caught up to her. She had been sold to Theron. She had been bought like a piece of property, a trophy to be displayed, humiliated, used. But there was something else at play here. There was a deeper force she couldn't escape, no matter how hard she tried to push it away. And that force was Caelan. Her mind swirled with confusion. The taste of him still lingered on her lips, a sensation she couldn't shake. The memory of his touch, the way his hands had held her, had made her forget the world around her. She could still feel the heat of his breath against her skin, the way he'd kissed her like she was the only thing that mattered. But that was impossible. It had to be. He was his brother's, wasn't he? Theron's. Aeryn sat up in bed, the cool sheets sliding off her skin as she rubbed her face in frustration. What was she supposed to do? She couldn't allow herself to feel anything for Caelan. She couldn't let him get close, not when her life was already tethered to the king. The room was dark, the only light coming from the pale moon filtering through the window. She stared at it, wondering if it had any answers for her. But the moon offered no comfort. It was then that she heard it. The soft sound of footsteps approaching, slow and deliberate. She froze, her breath caught in her throat. She didn't have to look to know who it was. Caelan. He appeared in the doorway, his silhouette dark against the dim light, the tension in the room so thick it could be cut with a knife. His eyes locked with hers, and for a brief moment, the rest of the world disappeared. There was only the two of them, caught in a moment that neither of them could control. "You're awake," he said, his voice low, thick with something Aeryn couldn't name. She didn't know what to say, so she simply nodded. Caelan took a step closer, his gaze never leaving hers. "I didn't mean to make you feel overwhelmed." Aeryn swallowed hard, her heart pounding in her chest. "You didn't." But she couldn't lie to herself. She had been overwhelmed, had felt something stir inside her that she had no right to feel. A connection so strong, so deep, that it shook her to her core. "Then why are you so far away?" he asked, his voice thick with meaning. She wanted to back away, to put distance between them, but she couldn't. Not when everything inside her screamed for her to be closer, to feel his touch again. The kiss, the way it had made her feel alive, something she hadn't felt in years, it haunted her. "I don't belong here," she whispered, the words escaping her before she could stop them. "I don't either," Caelan replied, stepping closer, his voice softer now, more vulnerable than she had ever heard it before. "But that doesn't mean we can't change it." Aeryn's heart skipped a beat. "Change it." "We don't have to follow the paths laid out for us," Caelan said, his gaze burning with something wild, something she couldn't deny. "We can make our own way. Together." Aeryn took a step back, trying to collect herself. "You don't understand. You belong to him. You belong to the king." Caelan's expression faltered, but only for a moment. He closed the distance between them, his hand reaching out to gently touch her arm. "Not anymore. I never have, Aeryn." Her breath caught as she looked up at him, his eyes filled with the weight of something she couldn't comprehend. The world around them seemed to vanish, leaving only the two of them, standing in the silence, breathing the same air. "I can't do this," Aeryn said, her voice trembling with the force of the emotions crashing through her. "I can't be with you. Not when my life is tied to your brother. Not when everything about us is wrong." Caelan's expression softened, and he reached up to cup her cheek, his touch warm and grounding. "Nothing about this is wrong. Nothing about us is wrong, Aeryn." Aeryn's chest tightened as she looked into his eyes, the bond between them growing stronger with every passing second. The pull was undeniable, impossible to ignore. Her wolf stirred inside her, pressing forward, demanding that she embrace it, that she accept him. But what would it cost her? What would it cost them both? The next day, the tension in the palace was thick, suffocating. Aeryn walked through the halls, her head spinning with everything that had happened. Caelan's touch, his words, they echoed in her mind. She couldn't stop thinking about him, about the connection they shared. But as she walked, she couldn't help but feel the weight of Theron's gaze. He was always watching, always waiting for her to slip, always waiting for her to make a mistake. And she knew that mistake would come. Theron's presence was everywhere. His shadow lingered in every corner of the castle. Aeryn could feel his eyes on her even when he wasn't near. He was waiting for her to fail, waiting for her to break. But Aeryn was done being afraid. Later that night, the palace held a grand feast in honor of the king's victory over a rival pack. The air was thick with tension, the grand hall filled with Lycans and nobles alike. Aeryn stood at the edge of the room, trying to remain unnoticed. Her heart still raced from the brief encounter with Caelan earlier in the day, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. She barely noticed when Theron approached her, his dark gaze fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "You're avoiding me," he said, his voice a low growl. Aeryn stiffened, but didn't respond. "Don't think you can escape me," he continued, his words laced with malice. "You're mine now. Forever." Her chest tightened at the sound of his voice. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. Theron would never let her go. He would never let her have what she wanted. Not freedom, not love, not Caelan. Before she could say anything, Caelan appeared at her side, his presence like a storm. "Leave her alone, Theron." The air between them crackled with tension. Aeryn glanced at Caelan, his eyes blazing with a fire she had never seen before. The battle was just beginning, and she knew it wasn't just between the brothers. It was between everything she had ever known and everything she wanted. Just as Theron stepped closer, his face twisted in rage, Aeryn felt the unmistakable pull of the bond surge inside her, stronger than ever before. She didn't know what to do, where to go. Her heart was torn between two worlds, and she couldn't escape either. "I won't let you destroy us," Caelan whispered, his voice filled with both determination and fear. It was only a whisper, but it felt like a shout in the quiet of the palace. Aeryn's heart thudded painfully against her ribs as the words slipped from Caelan's lips, low and dangerous. "I won't let him have you." She stood still, her breath caught in her throat. It wasn't just the sound of his words, it was the fire in his voice, the fierce protectiveness that radiated from him. Aeryn had never expected him to say it, but now that he had, she realized how much it mattered, how much it meant. She'd been running from this connection, from him, from the truth of what they were to each other. She thought that if she closed her eyes, if she pretended not to feel the bond, it would go away. But Caelan had spoken the words that she could never escape. The words that would define the rest of her life. "I won't let him have you," he repeated, stepping closer to her, his eyes locked on hers with an intensity that made her knees weaken. Aeryn opened her mouth, but the words didn't come. She had to say something. She had to stop this before it went too far. But the truth was, she didn't know what to say. She didn't know how to stop this growing pull between them. This bond that neither of them could explain, but both of them could feel. And then it hit her. She wasn't trying to stop it. No matter how much she told herself she was, no matter how much she feared it, a part of her was already too far gone. Too deeply entangled in this thing with him. Her wolf stirred, thrumming under her skin. It was as if it knew something she didn't, something that terrified her more than she could put into words. Without thinking, she stepped back. "Caelan," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "You can't." But he was already there, his hand brushing against her cheek, sending a jolt of warmth through her. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. His touch, gentle but firm, spoke more than words. ever could. And she couldn't pull away. Not from him. Not now. His thumb brushed across her lips, his gaze following the movement, his breath coming in slow, steady gasps. Aeryn's heart thundered in her chest, her thoughts a chaotic swirl of need, fear, and confusion. She couldn't let this happen. She couldn't let herself fall for him. But how could she stop it? Her body responded before her mind could even process what was happening. She leaned into him, the world narrowing down to just the two of them, the space between them closing with each heartbeat. She felt his warmth, his strength, everything about him drawing her in, pulling her closer to something she couldn't even name. "I told you," he murmured, his lips grazing her ear. "I won't let him have you." "I can't." The words sent a shock of awareness through her, and for the first time, Aeryn realized just how much she needed him. Not just the physical pull, but the emotional connection, the bond that tied her to him in ways she couldn't understand. Before she could stop herself, she reached up, her fingers threading into his hair, pulling him down to her. Her lips met his in a kiss that was slow at first, tentative, as if they were both testing the waters. But it deepened quickly, the urgency of their connection taking over, pushing aside all doubts, all fears. In that kiss, Aeryn felt something she couldn't deny. She felt the bond between them, thrumming through her like a living thing. It was more than just physical attraction. It was a force beyond her control, a force she didn't want to fight anymore. She let him pull her closer, their bodies pressing together, and she felt the weight of his desire, his need, just as heavy as her own. But just as quickly as the kiss had deepened, it pulled back. Caelan broke away, his chest rising and falling as he tried to steady his breath. "I won't force you," he said, his voice rough. "But I won't let you go, Aeryn." Her heart was a storm inside her chest, and the words she needed to say felt like they were stuck in her throat. She had never felt anything like this before, this wild, raw need. But she couldn't give in. Not completely. "I don't know what this is," she whispered, her hands trembling slightly as they dropped to her sides. "I don't know if I can trust you." He stepped back, his expression softening, but his eyes still burning with that intensity that made her want to lose herself in him. "You don't have to trust me, Aeryn," he said quietly. "Not yet. But you will. You have no idea how much power you have over me." She swallowed hard, her thoughts still swirling, still spinning out of control. She couldn't deny that something was happening between them, something undeniable, something dangerous. But what was the cost? "I don't belong to you," she said, her voice shaky. "I'm not yours to claim." He smiled, a small, knowing smile. "Not yet, maybe. But soon, Aeryn. Soon." Aeryn turned away, walking toward the window, her back to him. She needed distance. She needed to think. But Caelan didn't let her retreat for long. He stepped up behind her, his presence a weight against her shoulders. "You can't outrun this. You can't outrun me." She turned to face him, her breath catching in her throat as she looked up at him. "I don't want to outrun you," she whispered. "But you don't understand. You don't know what you're asking of me." His eyes softened, and he stepped closer again, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know exactly what I'm asking of you, Aeryn. I'm asking you to trust me, to let go of the fear, to embrace what we both feel." Aeryn felt her resolve start to crumble. But she couldn't let it happen. Not now. Not when everything was at stake. "I can't," she said, her voice barely audible. "I can't let this happen." But as she turned away from him, she knew. She knew the battle wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The next few days passed in a blur of tension and uncertainty. Aeryn tried to keep her distance from Caelan, but every time their paths crossed, the pull between them was impossible to ignore. Her thoughts were consumed by him, by the way he looked at her, by the way his touch made her feel things she couldn't explain. And every time Theron spoke to her, she felt the weight of his eyes on her, the control he had over her, and the growing fear that she was slowly losing herself in this twisted, dangerous game. But no matter how hard she tried to push him away, the truth remained. She was falling for Caelan. Later that night, Aeryn found herself walking through the palace halls, her mind a maze of confusion. She needed to clear her head. She needed to understand what was happening to her. But as she walked, she wasn't alone. Caelan appeared from the shadows, his presence like a storm on the horizon. He didn't speak immediately. He didn't need to. His eyes told her everything she needed to know. "I'm not letting you walk this path alone," he said quietly, his voice low but certain. "Not now, not ever." Aeryn's heart fluttered in her chest, the words she had been holding back threatening to spill. But she couldn't speak them. Not yet. Instead, she turned to him, her gaze steady, and whispered, "Then show me." The moment their lips met again, everything around them disappeared. The cold stone walls, the looming threat of Theron, the entire world, they all faded away. There was only Caelan, and there was only Aeryn. In that moment, she realized she wasn't just falling for him. She was already lost. Completely. And there was no turning back. The kiss broke again, and Caelan pulled away, his expression torn between desire and something deeper. "Aeryn," he whispered, his voice full of raw emotion. "I'm not just fighting for you. I'm fighting for us." But before Aeryn could answer, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway. Theron. He was close. And he was ready to take control once more. Aeryn never expected to be so torn. The storm inside her was unbearable. It wasn't just the fire Caelan ignited in her heart. It was the cold chains of duty that bound her to Theron. She was caught between them both, trapped in a web of desire and duty, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't break free. But tonight, as the weight of her thoughts pulled her under, she felt something in the air shift. The moment was different. The tension that had hung in the air for weeks, suffocating her, had finally reached its breaking point. It was no longer just about Caelan. It was no longer just about Theron. It was about her, about what she wanted, and about the choice she could no longer avoid. It started with the faintest noise, a creak of the door, the softest sound that went unnoticed by the rest of the palace. But Aeryn heard it. Her heart stilled, the air growing thick as a figure entered her room. She didn't have to turn to know who it was. Caelan. His presence filled the space around her, heavy with the promise of something more. Something dangerous. She stood at the window, her back to him, staring out at the vast darkness of the lands stretching before her. The pale moonlight reflected off the snow, casting everything in an ethereal glow. But it wasn't the view she was focused on. It was him. The man who had stolen her heart, piece by piece, without even trying. "I told you I wouldn't leave you," Caelan said softly, his voice thick with a promise she couldn't ignore. Aeryn closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the burn of the bond between them, the force that had only grown stronger with every passing second. She tried to push it away, tried to block it out, but it was too late. She was already lost. But it wasn't just him that haunted her. It was Theron, too. The king who had bought her, who had made her his possession, who held her future in his hands. The man who was slowly breaking her. "You don't have to do this," Aeryn whispered, her voice shaky. "I'm not yours to claim, Caelan. I can't be." She heard him take a step forward, the sound of his boots against the stone floor sharp in the silence. He was too close now. His presence wrapped around her like a storm, pulling her in, trapping her in the whirlwind of his emotions. "You are," he said, his voice low, almost a growl. "And you always will be." Before Aeryn could respond, the door slammed open, and the figure standing in the doorway was unmistakable. Theron. His presence was like a dark cloud that filled the room, casting a shadow over everything. His eyes locked onto Caelan, and for a moment, Aeryn felt the room freeze, the tension so thick it could suffocate them all. "What is this?" Theron's voice was a cold blade, sharp and unforgiving. Caelan didn't flinch. Instead, he stepped forward, his gaze never leaving Theron's. It's nothing you can control, brother. Aeryn could feel the anger radiating from Theron, the fury burning in his chest. She could see it in the way his jaw clenched, in the way his fists tightened at his sides. He had always been a king, a man used to power, used to control. But now, in this moment, Aeryn saw the cracks in his armor. "This is my kingdom," Theron growled, "and you will not take what's mine." Aeryn's heart skipped a beat. The words stung like a slap across her face. She had never been his to take. Not like this. But the truth was, she had never been anyone's. "I don't belong to you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but firm. "I never have." Theron's gaze shifted to her, the weight of his eyes pressing down on her like a physical force. There was something else in them now, something darker, more dangerous. Aeryn's breath hitched, and she instinctively took a step back. "You'll come with me," Theron said, his voice laced with menace. "And if you don't, I'll make sure he never sees you again." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. She had known it would come to this. She had known that Theron would try to control her, that he would use her against Caelan. But hearing it, hearing the threat in his voice, made her blood run cold. And yet, even as the fear clutched at her chest, something inside her rebelled. It wasn't just the anger or the fear, it was the bond. The pull to Caelan that she couldn't deny. "You won't control me," she said, her voice steady. "Not anymore." Theron's expression faltered for a moment, surprise flickering in his eyes. But only for a moment. Then it was gone, replaced by the familiar coldness that Aeryn had grown to fear. "You have no choice," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You belong to me, Aeryn. You always will." The next few hours felt like a blur, a whirlwind of emotions that Aeryn couldn't keep up with. She was torn between two worlds, two men, and the weight of her choices was crushing. Theron was relentless, pulling her into his world of control, of power. But Caelan was different. He had never asked her to choose. He had never forced her into a corner. But the bond between them, the connection that ran deeper than anything she had ever felt, was a force that she couldn't escape. She found herself in the courtyard, the cold air biting at her skin, the sound of footsteps behind her. She didn't need to turn to know who it was. Caelan. He always found her. "You don't have to stay here," he said, his voice soft, yet filled with a quiet intensity. "I'll take you away from this." Aeryn shook her head, feeling the weight of her decision pressing down on her. I can't leave. Not now." "But why?" Caelan asked, stepping closer, his breath warm against her skin. "Why are you still holding on to him?" Aeryn closed her eyes, the pain in her chest almost unbearable. "Because he's my king, because he owns me." "You're not his," Caelan said, his voice breaking. "You never were. You don't belong to him, Aeryn. You belong to yourself. And to me." The words hit her like a shockwave, rattling her bones. She felt the bond between them surge, felt the pull of it, but she also felt the fear, the uncertainty. Could she really let go? Could she really choose him over everything she had known? Her heart raced, and in that moment, she realized the truth. She had never belonged to Theron. She had never belonged to anyone. But she could belong to Caelan, if she chose to. And then the impossible happened. Without thinking, she stepped forward, closing the distance between them, and kissed him. It was everything she had ever wanted. It was the fire, the heat, the passion that had been simmering beneath the surface for so long. It was the freedom she had been searching for. When they broke apart, her breath was ragged, her heart pounding in her chest. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice shaky. "I don't know what I'm doing." Caelan cupped her face, his thumbs brushing against her skin. "You're not alone anymore," he said, his voice filled with a quiet promise. "And you never will be." Aeryn nodded, feeling the weight of his words sink into her heart. She had made her choice. But the question that still lingered in her mind was whether it was too late. Hours later, the castle was silent. The feast had ended, but Aeryn's mind was still racing. She had made her choice. She had chosen Caelan, chosen the bond they shared, chosen the freedom she had never known. But the world around her hadn't changed. Theron would still be waiting for her. She walked the halls of the castle, her footsteps echoing in the emptiness. She felt like a ghost, like a shadow in her own life. The tension was unbearable, the weight of her decision pulling her under. But then a sound. A creak of the door. Aeryn froze. Theron stood in the doorway, his presence as cold as the stone walls around them. His gaze locked on her, and she felt the familiar weight of his eyes, the possessiveness that made her blood run cold. "You can't run from me," he said, his voice low and dangerous. She turned to face him, her heart pounding. "I'm not running. I'm choosing." Theron's eyes narrowed. "You think you have a choice?" Aeryn held her ground. "I do." Just as the words left her lips, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway, the heavy tread unmistakable. Caelan. He was coming for her. But would he be too late? Aeryn could feel the storm inside her, and it wasn't the storm of her thoughts. No, this was something far more powerful, something primal, something she could no longer deny. Her wolf was awake, clawing at her from within, demanding that she make a choice. But how could she? She had been sold, betrayed, bound by a history not of her making. Theron Veyr owned her in ways that she couldn't escape, yet it was Caelan who held her heart, the only man who had ever seen her as more than a pawn. The weight of this truth was suffocating. The world felt like it was closing in on her, and yet she couldn't breathe. She had kissed Caelan. She had let herself feel something for him she never thought possible, but now it seemed the price for that connection might be more than she could bear. The world outside her chambers was quiet, too quiet. There were no sounds of celebration, no footsteps echoing down the hallways. Just silence. The kind of silence that made her skin crawl, that made her aware of every breath, every heartbeat. She had been here before, trapped in her own mind, haunted by what she couldn't change. But this time it was different. This time, she felt the crack of something breaking deep inside her. And then, the door creaked open. It wasn't Theron. It wasn't Caelan either. Aeryn froze, every muscle in her body tense. She didn't have to look to know who it was. She could feel the presence before the figure stepped fully into the room. She had felt it all along, a looming shadow that had been hanging over her ever since the moment she stepped foot into this palace. Lena. Aeryn had almost forgotten about her. Almost. But the moment Lena stepped forward, the air shifted again. Lena's eyes were sharp, cold, but there was something in her gaze that betrayed a deeper emotion, fear, maybe. Or pity. Either way, Aeryn didn't want to see it. "What are you doing here?" Aeryn asked, her voice tight. She was already exhausted, already torn apart. She didn't need this. Lena didn't answer right away. She walked into the room, her movements deliberate, cautious. "I came to warn you," she said, her voice low, almost too quiet. Aeryn's chest tightened. "Warn me?" Lena nodded. "You've made a dangerous choice, Aeryn. You know that, don't you? Theron won't let you walk away. Not from him. Not from what he owns." Aeryn's stomach dropped. "I'm not his to own," she said, her voice fiercer than she had intended. "You know that. You've seen it. I'm no one's." Lena's eyes softened, just for a moment, before her expression hardened again. "You think that's enough to stop him? You think you can defy him, Aeryn? He'll break you." Aeryn felt the sting of her words, but it wasn't the words that hurt. It was the truth behind them. Theron was ruthless. He had already shown that. But the connection she felt with Caelan, the pull of the bond that was growing stronger every day, it was something different. Something she wasn't ready to let go of. "I won't let him break me," Aeryn said, her voice barely above a whisper, but there was conviction in her words. I won't let him take what's mine. Lena took a step closer, her gaze never leaving Aeryn's. And what's yours, exactly? Caelan? You think he's going to stand by you when it all falls apart. But just as they shared a quiet moment of peace, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed outside the door. It was Theron. And Aeryn knew, without a doubt, that whatever peace they had found would soon be shattered. Aeryn opened her mouth to respond, but the words caught in her throat. Because deep down, she didn't know. She didn't know if Caelan could truly stand against his brother. He had been loyal to Theron for so long. How could she ask him to break that loyalty for her? For them? The silence between them stretched, thick with the unspoken question hanging in the air. Aeryn had no answers. She didn't know what the future held. But she knew she couldn't keep running from it. Go, Aeryn said, the words sharp now. You've said your piece. Now leave. Lena hesitated, her gaze flickering over Aeryn for a moment longer before she turned and walked toward the door. But before she left, she spoke once more, her voice softer now. You've made your choice. But remember, choices come with consequences. That night, Aeryn couldn't sleep. Her mind was a battlefield, the weight of her decision bearing down on her with every passing second. She had felt the sting of Lena's words, but it was the truth of them that haunted her. Could she really be with Caelan? Could she truly walk away from the only life she had ever known? And what about Theron? She had been sold to him. She was bound to him. He had the power to destroy her, to tear her apart, and yet she still didn't understand why he wanted her in the first place. Why had he bought her? Was it truly to humiliate her, or was there something more? Her thoughts swirled around her as she lay in the bed that had become both her prison and her refuge. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face, the face of the man who had sold her, the face of the man who had made her feel like she was nothing. But then she saw Caelan's face. The fire in his eyes, the warmth in his touch, the way he had kissed her, and for a moment she had felt like she wasn't broken. She wasn't just a possession. She wasn't just a tool to be used. The door creaked open, and Aeryn's breath caught in her throat. It was him. It had to be. Caelan, she whispered, sitting up in bed, her heart racing. She didn't have to see him to know it was him. She felt him. She felt the pull of the bond between them. He stepped into the room, his presence filling the space, the heat of his body a stark contrast to the cold of the palace. His eyes were dark, almost haunted, but there was something else in them too, something softer, something real. He didn't speak at first. Instead, he crossed the room to where she sat, his movements slow, deliberate. When he reached her, he didn't touch her. Not yet. He simply stood there, staring at her, as though he were seeing her for the first time. Caelan, Aeryn said, her voice trembling. What are you doing here? He didn't answer at first, his gaze sweeping over her. But then, with a quiet sigh, he sat down beside her. I came because you're not alone, Aeryn. You never have to be alone again. Her heart ached at the sincerity in his voice. The pull of the bond between them surged, as though it were a living thing, demanding that she choose him. But she couldn't. Not yet. Not when the consequences of that choice were still so unclear. I don't know if I can do this, she whispered, her voice trembling with the weight of everything she couldn't say. You don't have to do anything, Aeryn, Caelan said, his voice gentle but firm. I'm not asking you to choose right now. I'm just asking you to trust me. To trust that I'm not going anywhere. Aeryn looked at him, her chest tightening as she felt the depth of the emotion in his words. She wanted to trust him. She wanted to believe that they could escape this life, that they could build something together, something real. But the world around her was too complicated, too dangerous. I'm scared, Caelan, she whispered. Scared of what this will cost me. I'll be with you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. No matter what it costs, I'll be with you. We'll figure it out together. Her heart swelled in her chest, the warmth of his words filling the empty spaces inside her. She had never felt so torn in her life, but for the first time, she felt like there might be a way out. A way to escape the chains that had bound her for so long. She reached out and touched his hand, the contact sending a jolt of electricity through her body. "I don't know how this ends," she said, her voice soft but steady. "But I'm willing to find out. With you." Caelan smiled, his eyes softening. "Then we'll face it together, Aeryn. And whatever happens, I'll be by your side." And in that moment, for the first time in her life, Aeryn felt like she wasn't alone. She wasn't just the Omega. She wasn't just the girl who had been sold. She was something more. She was Caelan's. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The sound of the footsteps was unmistakable. Aeryn's breath caught in her throat as the heavy steps approached the door, their echo growing louder with each passing second. She had felt Caelan's presence beside her like a steady anchor, grounding her in the chaos of everything she was running from. But now, with Theron's footsteps growing nearer, everything around her seemed to tremble, as if the very walls were about to come crashing down. Aeryn turned her head toward Caelan, her eyes wide with a fear she couldn't contain. She didn't have to say anything. He knew. He always knew. His face hardened, his jaw tightening as he reached for her hand, pulling her gently toward him. "You don't have to do this," she whispered, her voice thick with desperation. Caelan's gaze softened, but there was a fierce determination in it that made her heart pound in her chest. "I won't let him take you. Not now. Not ever." But even as he spoke, she could feel the pressure building, the undeniable force of Theron's presence just outside the door. There was no escape. Not unless they fought. And fighting would come with a cost. The door creaked open, and there he was. Theron. Aeryn's heart skipped a beat as his gaze locked onto her, a chill running down her spine. His eyes were colder than she had ever seen them, the darkness swirling in them like a storm, dangerous and unrelenting. He stepped into the room, his imposing figure filling the space with an aura of power and control. "You're not going anywhere," Theron said, his voice low and controlled, like the calm before a hurricane. Aeryn's pulse quickened as she looked between him and Caelan. She could feel the tension in the room, thick enough to suffocate them all. She wanted to say something, to make it stop, but the words wouldn't come. Not now. Not when everything was spiraling out of control. Theron's gaze shifted to Caelan, and for a moment, the two brothers just stared at each other, the weight of years of rivalry and resentment hanging in the air. Aeryn felt like she was caught between them, a pawn in their twisted game. But Caelan wasn't backing down. "You can't control her anymore," Caelan said, his voice steady, though it was laced with anger. Theron's lips curled into a twisted smile. "She was never yours to control, Caelan. She belongs to me. You know that." Aeryn's heart pounded in her chest as she glanced at Caelan, who stood his ground, his posture tense but resolute. She could feel the pull of the bond between them, the undeniable connection that had only grown stronger with each passing day. But now, faced with Theron's wrath, she didn't know if they would survive this. "Leave," Caelan spat, his voice filled with a raw edge of defiance. "Now." Theron's eyes darkened with a fury that made Aeryn's blood run cold. "You think you can tell me what to do in my own castle? You think you can take what's mine?" Aeryn's breath hitched as Theron stepped toward Caelan, his presence looming over him like a shadow. But before anything could happen, she stepped forward, her heart pounding in her ears. "Stop," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "Both of you." For a moment, the room was silent. The tension was palpable, thick enough to strangle them all. Aeryn's eyes flickered between the two men, the men who had come to define her world in ways she hadn't understood before. One was a king, the other a prince, but they were both men driven by power, by control. She had been caught in the middle of their game for far too long. But no more. "This isn't about you," she said, her voice trembling but fierce. This is about me. And what I want. Theron's eyes narrowed, his expression hardening as he took a step toward her. You want to choose him? His voice was a low growl, like a wolf baring its teeth. You want to abandon everything we've built? Aeryn's chest tightened, but she held her ground. I'm not abandoning anything. I'm choosing freedom. And I choose Caelan. The silence that followed was deafening. Aeryn felt the weight of her words, felt the shock of the declaration hitting her like a wave. She had said it. She had chosen. But it wasn't just about choosing Caelan. It was about choosing herself. Her heart ached with the weight of everything she had been through, everything she had suffered. She had been sold. She had been trapped in a cage of duty and obligation. But now, for the first time, she felt like she was free. Free to choose. Free to live. Then you've made your choice, Theron said, his voice cold and menacing. But don't think there won't be consequences. Aeryn's heart skipped a beat as Theron stepped back, his eyes burning with anger. She could feel the storm building in him, the fury that would explode if she pushed him any further. But she couldn't go back. Not now. Without another word, Theron turned and walked out of the room, slamming the door behind him. Aeryn stood there, her chest rising and falling with each breath, the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, Caelan moved toward her, his hands gently cupping her face, his gaze softening as he looked at her. You're not alone, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. You never have to be. Aeryn's heart swelled with a mix of relief and fear. She had done it. She had made the choice. But what would it cost them? What would it cost her? But Caelan didn't give her a chance to doubt herself. He pulled her into his arms, his lips finding hers in a kiss that was tender and full of promise. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Aeryn let herself feel it. Let herself feel the warmth, the fire, the connection that had always been there. As they pulled apart, Aeryn's breath was ragged, her chest rising and falling with the intensity of the moment. I don't know what comes next, she whispered, but I know I want to face it with you. Caelan smiled, a rare softness in his eyes. We'll face it together. Whatever happens, Aeryn, we're in this together. The next few days felt like a whirlwind. The palace, once a place of tension and fear, now seemed like a place of waiting. Every corner Aeryn turned, every shadow she passed, she could feel Theron's presence looming over her. His anger was palpable, but so was his determination to reclaim what he thought was his. But Caelan was with her. They spent their days in quiet defiance, learning to navigate the halls of the palace without Theron's ever-present watch. They stole moments in the gardens, their hands entwined, their hearts beating in sync as if they were the only two people in the world. And for a while, it was enough. But the storm was coming. Aeryn could feel it in the air, a tension that had been building for days, something darker that was about to break. She had chosen. She had made the decision to stand by Caelan, but she knew that standing by him meant they would both have to face the consequences. Theron would never let them go. He would never let her go. And then it came. That night, Aeryn stood by the window once more, her eyes scanning the horizon. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a silver light over the castle grounds. The world felt still, like everything was waiting for something. For her. For them. A knock on the door broke the silence. Aeryn turned, her heart racing as she saw Caelan standing in the doorway. His expression was grim, his eyes dark with the weight of something unspoken. Something's happened, he said quietly. Aeryn's heart dropped. What? The council meeting, Caelan continued, his voice tight. Theron's made his move. Aeryn's blood ran cold. What does he want? Caelan's eyes darkened with the weight of the words. He's calling for a war. Aeryn's stomach clenched. A war? Over me. Over everything, Caelan replied, his voice laced with frustration and anger. He won't let this go. He won't let you go. And just like that, everything she had feared, Everything she had tried to avoid came crashing down. The storm had arrived, and Aeryn knew there was no escaping it. As the final word left Caelan's lips, the door behind them slammed open. Theron stood there, his eyes blazing with fury, the weight of his anger crashing into the room like a tidal wave. "You think you can defy me?" Theron's voice was low, dangerous, and filled with a fury Aeryn had never seen before. The howl of the wind outside seemed to echo the turmoil inside Aeryn's chest. Her heart, once a steady rhythm of longing and hope, now raced with fear. Fear of what was to come. Fear of the cost of her choices. She had chosen Caelan, and in doing so, had declared war with Theron, a king who had once owned her, a king who would stop at nothing to reclaim her. The silence in the room was deafening. Caelan stood before her, his posture tense, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. His presence was a comfort, but even his strength couldn't quiet the storm that raged in her heart. She had never wanted to be part of a battle, never wanted to become the reason for a war, but now here they were. And no matter how hard she tried to convince herself that she had made the right choice, the consequences of that decision were becoming clearer with each passing second. The tension that had once simmered beneath the surface of their relationship now bubbled to the top, spilling over into something darker. Aeryn's gaze shifted to the window, where the pale moonlight flickered against the glass. She could feel the eyes of the kingdom on her, the whispers of the people, the expectations of the pack. She was no longer just Aeryn Mora, the orphaned Omega from a disgraced family. No, she was something more now. Something far more dangerous. And she had no idea how to navigate this world of power and betrayal. Caelan. Aeryn's voice was barely a whisper, a thread of uncertainty weaving through her words. "What are we supposed to do now?" Caelan's eyes softened, his anger momentarily dissipating as he crossed the room toward her. He reached out, cupping her face in his hands, his touch gentle but firm. "We fight," he said simply, his voice full of resolve. "We fight for what's ours. For you. For us." The weight of his words settled over her like a heavy blanket. She had never seen Caelan like this before, so certain, so willing to go to war for her. And yet, in his eyes, she could see something else. A fire. A fire that had been lit in the depths of his soul, one that refused to be extinguished, no matter what it cost. "But we're up against him," Aeryn said, her throat tightening with fear. "He'll never let us go. You know that. Theron won't stop. He'll tear us apart." Caelan's hands tightened around her, pulling her closer until she could feel the steady beat of his heart against her own. "No," he whispered fiercely, his lips brushing against her forehead. "He won't, because we won't let him." For a moment, Aeryn allowed herself to believe him. She closed her eyes, leaning into his warmth, into the comfort of his presence. She wanted to believe that they could win, that they could overcome everything Theron had thrown their way. But the fear still gnawed at her, a constant reminder that the battle they were facing wasn't just about love. It was about power, and the consequences of defying a king. Been living in the shadow of Theron's power for so long that she had almost forgotten what it was like to fight for something she truly cared about. But now everything had changed. She was no longer the girl she had been when she first arrived at the palace. She was someone new, someone stronger, someone who would no longer be controlled. And as the hours passed, as the battle raged on, Aeryn found herself standing at the front of the fortress, her back straight, her eyes fixed on the horizon. The wind howled around her, carrying the scent of blood and destruction, but she didn't flinch. She couldn't. She had made her choice, and she would see it through. "You're not alone in this," Caelan murmured, as if reading her thoughts. "I'll always be here." Aeryn pulled back slightly, her gaze meeting his. "But what if? What if I'm not enough?" Her voice cracked with the weight of the question, the fear of being powerless washing over her once more. "What if we can't win?" Caelan's jaw tightened, his eyes darkening with a mixture of pain and determination. You are enough, he said, his voice low and unwavering. And we will win. Together. The conviction in his words stirred something deep inside her. It was a fire, small and flickering at first, but growing brighter with every passing second. She had never been the type to rely on anyone. She had been alone for so long, struggling to survive, struggling to belong. But Caelan was different. He had always been different. He didn't ask her to be someone she wasn't. He didn't ask her to sacrifice herself for the sake of his own desires. He wanted her just as she was. And that was something she could hold on to. Aeryn took a steadying breath, pushing the fear aside, at least for now. Then we fight, she said, her voice steady with newfound resolve. Caelan smiled, a glimmer of hope flashing in his eyes. We fight. The next few days were a blur of strategy and preparation. Caelan had gathered his most trusted allies, and together, they began to map out a plan. Aeryn had never seen him so determined, so focused. It was as though the weight of the world had shifted onto his shoulders, and he was carrying it with an ease that left her in awe. She couldn't help but wonder if this was the man who had always been lurking beneath the surface, the man who had been hidden by the shadow of his brother, by the expectations of the pack, by the weight of his own heritage. But now there was no hiding. There was no turning back. As the days passed, Aeryn found herself at the heart of the rebellion, torn between her loyalty to Caelan and her fear of what the future held. She could feel the tension in the air, the undercurrent of danger that seemed to pulse through every interaction, every conversation. Theron's presence loomed over them all, like a dark cloud waiting to break. And then, the worst happened. Theron's forces moved. They had been warned, of course. But no amount of preparation could have truly prepared them for the storm that descended upon them. The castle was under siege, the walls rattling with the force of the attack. Aeryn could feel the vibrations in the floor beneath her, the weight of the battle outside pressing in on her from all sides. Caelan had left to lead his warriors into battle, leaving her behind to hold the fortress. It was a decision she had fought against, but in the end, he had insisted. He couldn't afford to lose control. He couldn't afford to let the enemy get too close. Aeryn stood at the window, her hands pressed against the glass, watching the chaos unfold below her. The sky was dark, the air thick with the scent of smoke and blood. She could hear the distant sounds of clashing steel, the war cries of warriors engaged in a fight for their lives. And then she saw him. Theron. He stood at the front of his forces, his presence commanding, his eyes cold and unyielding. He was everything Aeryn had feared, a king driven by power, by a need to control. He didn't care who he destroyed to get what he wanted. And she was no different. She wasn't a queen to him. She was a prize, a pawn to be used in his game. And now she would have to fight to keep herself from being swept away by his wrath. The night was long, filled with screams and the clash of steel. Aeryn could feel her heart racing, her pulse thudding in her ears. She had never been in a battle like this before, never had to fight for her life, for her future. She had. But the night had other plans. Just as she thought the worst was over, the doors to the fortress burst open and a figure stepped inside. Her heart skipped a beat as she recognized him. Theron. He stood there, his eyes locked onto hers, his expression a mixture of fury and disbelief. I gave you everything, he said, his voice cold, harsh. And this is how you repay me? Aeryn stood tall, her gaze unwavering. You never gave me anything, she said, her voice steady. You took. You controlled. And now you'll lose everything. Theron's eyes narrowed, his jaw clenched as he stepped closer, his presence suffocating. You think you can defy me? His voice was barely a whisper, yet it vibrated with a deadly promise. You'll regret this, Aeryn. The figure in the doorway was a silhouette, obscured by the shadows that clung to the walls like ghosts of the past. Aeryn's heart skipped a beat, her breath caught in her throat. It couldn't be. It shouldn't be. He smiled, the soft curve of his lips a silent promise that no matter what happened next, they would face it together. Aeryn stepped closer, her fingers brushing lightly against his. "We've come so far," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "But I couldn't have done it without you." Caelan's expression softened, his eyes filled with something deeper than love. It was understanding. It was acceptance. It was home. "You'll never be alone again, Aeryn," he said, his voice steady, filled with conviction. "Not as long as I'm here." And in that moment, everything she had been running from seemed to melt away. All the pain, all the fear, all the doubt. It was gone. All that remained was the undeniable truth of their bond. But it was. The figure stepped forward, the light catching the outline of a face, familiar yet foreign. Theron's expression shifted, his hard facade faltering for just a moment. His eyes flickered to the newcomer, and, for the first time, Aeryn saw something like uncertainty flash across his features. He didn't speak at first, his jaw tightening as if he was trying to hold on to something that was slipping away. "Father." Theron's voice was strained, almost in disbelief. Aeryn's gaze snapped to the newcomer, her mind scrambling to make sense of the moment. The man who stepped forward was tall, his features sharp and regal, the familiar presence of a king unmistakable. But his eyes, they weren't the same as Theron's. They were softer, filled with something Aeryn hadn't expected, regret. The man's gaze met hers, and for a moment, everything in the room seemed to pause. She could feel the weight of the moment, the unraveling of a history long hidden. "I never wanted this for you, my son," the man said, his voice deep and weary. "But you've been blinded by power, by the throne." Aeryn felt a cold rush of confusion and wonder, but it was Caelan's steady presence beside her that kept her grounded. She could feel the bond pulsing between them, a silent promise that no matter what happened next, they would face it together. "You left me," Theron's voice cracked, a raw edge of pain breaking through the fury that had clouded his every word. "You abandoned me for power, for the throne." The older man, the king, didn't flinch. He simply nodded. "I thought it was the right thing. I thought I could protect you by staying away. But in the end, I've made everything worse." Aeryn watched, stunned, as the king's gaze flickered toward her. "I see you," he said quietly, his tone filled with a tenderness that was at odds with the harshness of his surroundings. "I see the woman you've become. You're not the same as the girl I sold. And for that, I am sorry." The words landed like a heavy blow, but they also stirred something within Aeryn. A realization that, perhaps, the truth she had been fighting for was finally coming to light. Theron's expression shifted, the intensity of his fury now mixed with confusion. You betrayed me. I was your son. You were supposed to help me." The king didn't flinch. "I failed you, Theron. But that doesn't mean I'm not here now. You are still my son. But you've lost your way." Aeryn's heart twisted. She had never expected this. Never expected the father to show up in the middle of all this chaos. But now, as she stood there, caught between the two men who had shaped her fate, she understood something. She understood what she had been running from all this time. Theron's rage had never been about her. It had never been about anything but his own fears of being abandoned, of losing control. He had projected that fear onto her, using her as a weapon to punish the world, to punish himself. But now it was Caelan's warmth, Caelan's presence beside her, that made everything clear. Aeryn took a deep breath, her heart steadying. "It's over, Theron," she said, her voice firm, though the weight of the moment threatened to choke her. "I've made my choice, and I choose freedom. I choose love." For a brief moment, it seemed like Theron would lash out, like he might challenge her, try to force her to fall in line once more. But he didn't. Instead, there was a quiet shift in him, an admission of defeat that didn't come in the form of words, but in the loss of the fire that had once burned so fiercely in his chest. The king looked at his son one last time. "You've lost your way," he said quietly, his voice filled with regret. "But you can still change. You can still turn back." And just like that, Aeryn knew. She knew it was over. Theron was broken. Not by anything she had done, but by the weight of his own guilt, by the consequences of his own choices. He turned slowly, his face contorted in a mixture of rage and sorrow, and with one last look at Aeryn, he walked away. Aeryn's body sagged with exhaustion as the sound of his footsteps faded, her breath releasing in a shaky exhale. It was over. She was free. But the victory was bittersweet. She glanced at Caelan, his presence beside her like a steady, unshakable force. His hand found hers, his fingers warm against her cold skin. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. But in the silence, their hearts beat as one, a steady rhythm of understanding. "It's over," Caelan said softly, his voice barely above a whisper, but the weight of his words was enough to make Aeryn's chest tighten. Aeryn nodded, her heart swelling with emotions she couldn't fully express. "We're free, Caelan. It's really over." Aeryn let herself feel it. Let herself feel the warmth of Caelan's touch, the strength of his love, the unbreakable bond between them. And as they stood there, the weight of the world seemed to lift, leaving only the two of them. The war was over. The battle had been won. And in the quiet aftermath, as the moonlight bathed the castle in its soft glow, Aeryn knew that she had finally found the peace she had been searching. The days that followed were filled with the soft, quiet moments that made life worth living. Aeryn and Caelan built a future together, a future where they were no longer bound by fear or power. They were free. And they were loved. Together, they rebuilt the kingdom, one forged not by power or domination, but by love, by understanding, and by the fierce strength of their bond. As Aeryn stood beside Caelan, watching the sun set over the horizon, she realized that she had finally found her place in the world. It wasn't as a pawn. It wasn't as someone to be controlled. She was a queen. She was Caelan's. And together, they ruled with compassion, with strength, and with love. And as the stars began to twinkle above them, Aeryn knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it together. Because love had always been the strongest power of all.